Hello and welcome back to another episode of Mr. V's Camping Chair Chat. My name is Mr. V and I'm currently sat in a sort of like metal folding chair in this small bedroom. So I moved out of my apartment last week on Wednesday and I'm currently now staying with family for a few weeks before I have somewhere a bit more permanent again, which means the Camping Chair Chat and actually my entire desk is just in like a random place. The actual camping chair, I would have been in that. I have the chair, but stupidly I packed away some of the other like cables and equipment that I normally use when I'm recording out and about. So I'm gonna get some more of those this week. And so the next camping chair chat for the Monaco Grand Prix, which is in just 1 week's time, as we're now on a triple header, will be in a place outside in the world. But for this week, I'm sat at my little temporary desk for the next few weeks. This is where I'm going to be spending many hours every day editing videos for the foreseeable future. I thought we'd just sit here and talk about the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, which we have just had at the Autodromo Internazionale Enzo Edino Ferrari. Couldn't choose a favourite son. Well, I guess one's the father, one's the son. Whatever. Couldn't choose just one Ferrari family member, so had to name it after both. The Imola, the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, obviously historically the San Marino Grand Prix, but since COVID it's come back as the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, which is just a region of Italy for those of you who don't know. And it was decent. It was pretty good. Those of you who watch this to find out whether you should watch the full race, yeah, maybe. It wasn't like an absolute banger, but it wasn't ultra boring like, say, the Japanese Grand Prix. We had some stuff going on. I think largely that was due to a couple of drivers being out of place following qualifying. And then we did have a couple safety cars, one virtual safety car, one real safety car, which, mixed up strategies a bit. So we'll talk about that. But you may have noticed there was no podcast last weekend. That is because I had to pack everything into a box, and I just had so much to do. I barely got it all done before we had to hand the keys back on Wednesday, so there was no podcast in the off week last weekend, but that's okay. We're back to racing, and we're back to rambling about racing. Going to make this a quicker podcast just because the internet here is not good, and so this will take a long time to upload. So I want to make it faster, so there's less data to upload. So we're going to quickly go through a couple of things that have happened in the 2 weeks since the Miami Grand Prix. Big news story of the last couple of weeks, Franco Colapinto, Argentine driver who you may have heard of from last year, obviously driving for Williams. He is now driving for Alpine, so Jack Doohan gone. Jack Doohan is gone. It's been announced that Franco Colapinto is up into the driver role at Alpine on a 5-race deal, kind of like provisional period. I get the feeling that 5-race thing is a little bit political. They're just saying that for Jack Doohan's sake, so his managers and lawyers don't get too unhappy. And they'll say that Franco Colapinto is on a test period to evaluate the options for the future. And then, they can get to the end of the 5 races and be like, well, it was close, but the data shows that Franco's a bit quicker, so we're going to go with him. So I think they're just doing that to save face a bit rather than just swapping. And also, it reserves Alpine the right that if Franco Colapinto is awful for the next 5 races, they can go back again, because as uncool as that is for Jack Doohan, if you're a racing driver, if you're a Formula open wheel racing driver, you want to be in F1. And so even if he just gets booted out unceremoniously, if he gets handed a place back again in 5 races time, will he say yes? Yes, he will. He will absolutely say yes and come back into that team. So it's going to be an interesting 5 races. This is obviously the first of 5, the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix for Franco Colapinto. All he has to do, in the words of Flavio Briatore, is drive fast, score points, and not crash. And, well, he definitely didn't do all 3 of those. He actually didn't. There's 2 of them he didn't do. Did he even do 1 of them? Did he even drive fast? We'll get into it. But he certainly didn't do 3 out of 3. other news for the last couple of weeks regarding Alpine again. Ollie Oakes, the team principal for Alpine, who was newly announced just over last winter break, up from High Tech GP, the kind of like junior formula team, brought in, did 7 races, and has been let go. No longer team principal. So there was speculation at the time that Ollie Oakes may have been involved in some kind of legal debacle. There are reports that from Miami he immediately went to Dubai, where his brother had been arrested for some kind of fraud-related scandal thing, and that maybe Ollie Oakes was going to be arrested as well. He was caught up in something illegal. That seems that that's not the case. We mainly know that because he showed up in Imola. He's not in a Dubai prison. He was at the racetrack at Imola this weekend. So, it's not like he's been arrested or like taken hostage or anything. He's still knocking around. He's just no longer working for Alpine. He's still associated with High Tech, and there was obviously junior Formula races this weekend, so he was there with High Tech once more. But yeah, he's out of Alpine, and so it very much seems to be the case that this was just part of the retranscendence of Flavio Briatore. Flavio obviously brought in as a special advisor to Alpine last year, and it wasn't clear at the time what level of involvement Flavio was going to have. Special advisor is an intentionally vague term, and that can mean many things. Like a couple of years ago, Alpine had Alain Prost as a special advisor, but obviously he was not like a team principal. He was very much just an advisor. I suppose he maybe did a bit of driver coaching. He maybe helped with getting on board some sponsors, particularly French sponsors, because, Alain Prost, kind of famous in Formula One. So there's that kind of special advisor, in the same way that Niki Lauda was a kind of special advisor to Mercedes. But Flavio, it turns out, was not that kind of special advisor. He was very much like a managing director of the team. He's been relatively involved since he came back last year, and it seems that this is all part of Flavio's transcendence back to running this team, because with Ollie Oakes' departure, it now seems to be the case that Flavio Briatore is the acting team principal for Alpine F1, and I get the feeling that's not going to be temporary. I get the feeling he could be there for a while. So Flavio Briatore, the man who had a lifetime ban from Formula One, is now back leading a Formula One team. For those of you who don't know, his lifetime ban was overturned by the courts in France. It was ruled that his banning was done unfairly without due evidence, which is probably true because Formula One just hated him. He was just not friends at all with the people who ran Formula One at the time. And so they did kind of oust him very quickly, and that was very detrimental to his other business ventures, his ownership, his part ownership of QPR in the English Football League and stuff like this. So it would have cost him tons of money. So it was ruled that it was unfair and his lifetime ban was overturned. He obviously didn't come straight back to Formula One. But now he's here. Now he's back with a vengeance, potentially. So yeah, this maybe is all tied together. Maybe the exit of Oakes is related to the swap with Colapinto and Doohan. Unclear, but clearly things are shifting. Things are happening at Alpine. For me, still, the team is in so much turmoil. It seems like it's all being done up to be sold on outside of the Renault organization. I just realized we're talking about Renault organization. Look at this. Hey, Renault organization that I used to be associated with. For those of you audio only, this is a Renault badge. What part number is it? How do they do your part numbers at Renault? I believe it's part number 8200469-132, specifically the front badge of a Renault Zoe. Did I take this when I wasn't meant to off of Renault production line? No comment. Have I ever been to Renault Flan, where the Renault Zoe was built at the time? Yes. Have I been to the proper production line where these would have been kept? Yes. Did I steal it? No comment. Anyway, it very much seems like the Renault organization is gearing up to get rid of Alpine F1 and trying to mold it into this saleable package. I suppose Flavio Briatore makes sense because he has been with the team through multiple change of hands when it went from Benetton back to Renault, that kind of thing. So it makes sense to have him attached, I guess, gives some vote of confidence because he knows F1, the business side of it, more than most other people. But I will say, if you are trying to sell a Formula One team, having a driver who crashes loads is maybe not the best thing, which brings us back to Franco Colapinto, because skipping ahead to qualifying, Franco Colapinto, picked up a penalty for entering the pit lane while it was closed in Q1. So in qualifying, Yuki Tsunoda, who's been getting to grips with the Red Bull car, but still obviously it's a finicky car. It's a difficult car. In Q1, he went off at the Villeneuve chicane. You probably would have seen highlights of this because lots of replays, because it was a visually spectacular crash. He did the left-hander, the entry to the Villeneuve chicane, but then didn't take the right-hander. Car carried on over the gravel, hit the barriers, bounced up and did a barrel roll, and then landed back down the right way up. So visually spectacular. Actually not the biggest crash. I'd say probably not as big of a crash as Doohan in Japan. But still, you barrel rolled a car, that's not nothing. And so you'll probably see some highlights of this very spectacular crash, but Yuki was fine. He immediately got out of the car and walked away. But anyway, that brought out a red flag in Q1. And so red flag, all the cars come in, go into their garages, and the pit lane is closed temporarily while stuff happens. And obviously the pit lane opens again when qualifying begins again. And actually the pit lane opens a couple minutes before. So you can enter the fast lane, the pit lane, before the green light goes on and you can get back onto track. But you can't go in the fast lane the entire time in the red flag. You have to be in the pit box for some of it, and the fast lane then opens. Franco Colapinto went out into the fast lane too early. Exact same thing that happened to Mercedes a few races ago. 1 place grid penalty. No arguing with that. I will say, I don't think any blame on Franco for that one. That's purely on Alpine. Basically, if you're the driver, you're sat in the car, and then and they say we're heading out the garage, and a guy comes out and waves you out. And what they meant was creep out kind of halfway out the door and then sit there so you're as far out as possible without being in the fast lane, as all the other cars do, so you can then get into the fast lane as quickly as possible. But I imagine they just didn't tell Colapinto that, and so they waved him out, and he was like, right, time to start qualifying again, and he obviously just drives into the fast lane and goes to the end of the pits. I haven't heard the team radio, but I can only assume that Alpine didn't tell him or didn't tell him clearly. That's on the team. And, it's not the first time that Alpine have had issues sending cars out. I once again draw your attention to the fact they sent Pierre Gasly out with tyre blankets on the tyres a couple of races ago. That one's quite obviously bad. So they seem to be just having multiple organizational issues at Alpine, and that continues, kind of throwing Colapinto under the bus a little bit with that one. But then in Q2, Franco does get up into Q2. Good. Obviously didn't get knocked out last in qualifying. So that's good for him. But Q2, he then crashes going through Tamburello, going out of turn 4, the end of Tamburello. Tamburello is not turn 1. Imola. You have to get rid of turn 1 and 19 off your track map. They're not corners. Tamburello is turn 1 anyway. Franco Colapinto crashes at Tamburello, does not set a time in Q2, so qualifies 15th, and therefore is grid 16 with his 1 place penalty. You gotta not do that, Franco. You gotta not do that, particularly if Alpine is trying to sell this team. Having a driver on the books who just racks up a massive rebuild cost throughout the season is not attractive for potential investors and new buyers. You gotta not do that, Franco. That was one of the 3 things that Flavio Briatore said. Drive fast, score points, and don't crash. And the first thing he did was crash. And obviously, in Franco Colapinto's case, that's not a new thing. He impressed a lot of people in Williams last year, yes, but he also crashed lots. That's not me being harsh. He had over double the crash damage per weekend of any other driver. He maybe even has more crashes than races. Oh god, because he had 2 major crashes in Brazil. So he's had 10 races, and in that time, he wrecked his car in Azerbaijan, he wrecked his car in Las Vegas qualifying, he wrecked his car in Brazil qualifying and Brazil race. He was definitely involved in a crash in Qatar, but I want to say that was like a turn 1 pile-up, so that's not his fault. He might have had another crash in practice at Qatar. My guy is pretty close to like a 1-to-1 crash to race ratio. It's like over half, which is it's too many. It's just too many. Obviously Franco Colapinto, his fans known for getting quite, let's say, unhappy with people. There was some controversy to start this weekend when I think maybe Sonoda like impeded Colapinto in practice. There was something happened between Colapinto and Sonoda in practice. Honestly, I didn't watch it. I just saw about this drama, and then basically loads of people started sending just like racist comments to Sonoda on Instagram, which is obviously horrendous. So, you know, maybe that's what the comments of this podcast are going to be filled with. But like, my guy crashes too much. Like, it seems like a foregone conclusion that he would be racing for Alpine for the rest of this year. But if he carries on this level of crashes, I don't know if Alpine can stomach that. Alpine need to keep developing. They've obviously taken some like bad paths in their development in the last couple of years. Like, they need to turn that car around. They need to be spending money on development. They can't afford this kind of crash bill. So let's see how this one goes. But he's got to crash less than doing at the very least. Another news story coming into this race, the fact that this race might be the last Imola race. So the contract for the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix is up. This is the last one contracted. And so it might return for 2026, but Formula One is currently in its own like regulations limited to 24 races a year, which obviously we currently have. I will say that's too many. That's too many races. 20 is fine. You know, 18 to 20, that's a good number of races. 24 Formula 1 is too many. When you have to cover it, it's your job. It's tiring. I can't imagine what it's like traveling to all of these places. Jesus. Anyway, Formula 1's limited to 24 races, which obviously we currently have this year. But next year, we have the new Grand Prix in Madrid being added. And so something has to drop off the calendar. Some people believe that Barcelona might drop off the calendar. You know, because just the Spanish Grand Prix would be in Madrid, but it seems like Barcelona is still going to be there next year. So something else has to be lost. And the firm favourite to be lost on the calendar is Imola, as its contract is ending this year. And so there were lots of shows of support for Imola from teams, from drivers, that kind of thing, because it's an historic circuit in Formula One. We obviously had the San Marino Grand Prix for decades, now back as the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. You know, obviously massive storylines here, such as the tragic events of the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix, fights between Schumacher and Alonso back in the noughties, all kinds of business, and it's in Italy. That speaks for itself. Any race in Italy is going to be like some big historic thing. So lots of shows of support for this historic track in the sport, but then again, would I be entirely sad if we lost it? No. We had an interesting race this year, but overall, Imola is not a great racetrack for modern Formula One cars. It's very tight, and it's just very prone to DRS trains. It's very difficult to overtake. It's not the best race in Europe. I would say it's not the best race in Italy. So, yeah, we still have a race in Italy, even if we lose Imola. I'm not too upset about it. I would rather have one race in Italy, one race in Spain, and then get like a German Grand Prix back. So yeah, if it does go, yeah, we lose some history for the sport, but we lost history out of the sport when we lost the German Grand Prix, and when Spa will be not here every year, and when we stopped going to Malaysia. Like, there were storylines there and it's short running, and the same thing for, you know, all kinds of other tracks that we no longer see in the sport. It happens. Tracks come and go. I would be more sad about other tracks. And so, yeah. But anyway, it looks like this is going to be the last race at Imola. We shall wait and see. That decision may not be made until later in the season. Some people come out to support this track. That's nice. I don't think it's going to work. I think it will be dropped in favour of Madrid, which I will say in this case is a shame, because the Mad Ring looks shit. But yeah, let's go. Okay, the last news story before we actually get to on-track action this weekend. The McLaren brake debacle, the rear brake assembly, tyre water, all this stuff, thermal imagery from Red Bull continues over the last couple of weeks. Lots of speculation as to what's going on, why McLaren is so good. For those of you who are not keeping up with the technical side of Formula 1, basically, obviously McLaren is fast this year, they're the best car this year, and lots of that is due to the fact that they can keep their tyres in an operating window better than other teams. So you'll see in qualifying, it's not like they're a second faster than everyone else. They're quick, don't get me wrong, it's a quick car, it's got a good aero platform and everything else. But their main advantage is in the race, they can just push harder on race stints because they don't overheat their tyres in the same way as other teams. That's the main difference, and there's been a lot of discussion as to how McLaren are achieving this. Obviously, there were accusations last year by Red Bull that they were filling tyres with water or filling their wheel assemblies with water. That's been disproved. There were then talks at Miami that Red Bull had got a hold of some thermal imaging of the McLaren brake ducts and saw them to be significantly colder than other teams. Wanted to touch on that. Very funny for Red Bull to say they got a hold of them. I'm sure I said in the thing 2 weeks ago, I thought Red Bull had just taken the thermal images, which I'm still not sure is legal or not. But they've since said that they got a hold of them from a third party. It's like, yeah, right. For those of you who don't know, you're not allowed certain types of cameras in the pit lane. That's not to say they're not there, because in Formula 1, you cheat as much as possible until you get caught. That's how it works, because it's a sport with so much money on the line and such fine margins. You take anything you can get, which includes any kind of cheating you can get away with. And so if you think that Red Bull and every other team don't have random cameras hidden around the place, you are being naive. Nothing confirmed here, but hypothetically, in your pit wall booth, where, you know, the team principal and a couple of people sit, hypothetically, you could build cameras and other sensors into the walls of that thing and then aim them at cars coming down the pit lane. Hypothetically, you could do this. And then obviously, Red Bull is only two garages down from McLaren. And so they're close enough that they could maybe get some images of McLaren during a pit stop, hypothetically. Obviously, you are not allowed to have these cameras inside the pit booth, but hypothetically, you could still put them there. I didn't say Red Bull are doing this, I'm just saying they could, if you get what I'm saying. So, it's funny that Red Bull said they acquired these thermal images, but anyway. So there's all this stuff, people speculating now about what McLaren are doing. I may have seen some YouTube videos in the last week. Some video came out from this guy, I think the name was Buchanan Motorsport or like B Motorsport. He said he worked at McLaren or did a research project at McLaren to do with phase change materials, and he attributed the performance to that. And then Driver 61 jumped on and just released the same video basically in a way that you could call clickbait. Hypothetically, you could call that clickbait because they didn't confirm anything. The speculation was in that case that McLaren have some kind of material that changes its thermal conductivity with temperature, which is pretty crazy. So when it gets hot to a certain point, it basically like switches and then becomes a very strong insulator to basically line the inside of the wheels and stop them from getting so hot from the brakes. Maybe that wouldn't give you the kind of advantage that McLaren are seeing. I don't think it would have to be more than that. There was an interesting interview with, and I forget who from McLaren, someone in the McLaren technical team. I actually can't remember who it was. And they basically were asked about this, and they said, they were asked like, is it, you know, water cooling or something else or whatever? And McLaren effectively said that it's not one thing, that it's just a well-designed system. And there was a quote in there that I found interesting. McLaren described it as a holistic approach to brake heat management. And I think that's really the key to this. And so getting into what I think, the Mr. V verdict as to McLaren tyre management, they may have phase change materials in there, sure. They also clearly have a very advanced air intake ducting system. We've seen images of the inside of the rear wheel assembly. They have more built up ducting to get the air to all different places and to then get the air out of there as well. They've done more work in that area than other teams. So yes, but I think it's interesting when they talk about a holistic approach to heat management, i.e. a full system level approach, because if you take a step back, people are obviously talking about getting the heat from the brakes out of the wheels so you don't overheat the wheels. Let's take a step back. Your problem is brakes get hot and they heat the wheels up too much. Rather than talking about how to get the heat out of there, why don't you focus on not heating it up in the first place? Lots of what I did when I worked in vehicle design was very system level. And so if you take a step back, the problem goes away and you don't need to vent the heat out if you just don't generate the heat in the first place. And so how can you do that? You can just not use the brakes. Now, I'm not saying that McLaren is not using the brakes. Obviously they are, but you can use them less than other teams and therefore generate less heat and heat the tires up less. And, it doesn't have to be 100% change. Even if a few percentage points less heat generated in the rear brakes makes a couple percentage points more grip for your tires if you heat them up less. And so I think that's more where McLaren is going. I think they've designed an overall system and maybe done some kind of driver coaching where they just use the brakes less. And I was watching some quali and onboard laps from Miami in previous races. And I think you can see, if you watch the quali laps, and particularly we now have these ghost laps where it's the fastest two cars in qualifying, which are not 100% accurate, but they give a good idea. You will see Max Verstappen brakes later into heavy braking zones. And coming down in Miami, coming down the main long back straight into turn 17, it looked like in their Q3 laps, both the McLaren drivers were coming off throttle and effectively lifting and coasting a few meters before their braking point. And so just going into the corner with 5 miles an hour less speed or 3 miles an hour less speed, braking a bit earlier and lighter. So it's a longer braking zone. In that short instance, that's obviously slower for lap time, because if you carry more speed in and brake later, you get to the corner faster, yes, but then overall, if you look at what happens after that, McLaren has heated up their tyres less. They have a very stable aero platform. If they brake in a less aggressive way, they can carry more minimum speed through a corner, and then they can get on throttle more, and their tyres are in better condition for the rest of the lap. I think that's largely the explanation for this. Is just McLaren have got a system where they just are much more gentle using the rear brakes. Maybe they run with just significantly more front brake bias. Maybe they're teaching the drivers, coaching the drivers to brake less. Maybe they've done something with their MGU-K, so they're harvesting more energy with that rather than actually using the brake discs. Obviously, the MGU-K comes from Mercedes, but we've also seen Mercedes has been pretty good in race pace, not as good as other front-running teams, but maybe some of that knowledge is going back to Mercedes if it is due to the power unit and the way they use the MGU-K and, come off throttle and get back on throttle out of corners. I think it's all these things. It's not actually to do with the brakes and the brake ducts. It's a much wider approach as to why McLaren is so good on their tyres. And I just think it's that. I just think they're not braking as much, quite honestly, which sounds stupid in a way, but if you can give up a tenth in a heavy braking zone, but then you gain 0.15 accelerating out and through the next corner, well, then that's an overall benefit to your lap time. So it's quicker. And so that's what I think they're doing. So that is the Mr. V verdict on McLaren tyre water debacle. That will obviously continue. Maybe it turns out there's some crazy innovative system in there. People have talked about diverting routings for hot airflow through the brakes. That would start to constitute active aero devices, which is illegal. So, the FIA did a teardown of the car in Miami and they determined nothing illegal is going on. So I don't think it's that. But so other stories from qualifying. We talked about Tsunoda crashed in Q1, Colapinto crashed in Q2. The other major thing you may have noticed in qualifying this weekend is 2 cars not in Q3. Both Ferraris are out. Leclerc P11, Lewis Hamilton P12. in a race at a venue with Ferrari in the name. It's not great. It's not good. The thing is, as we then saw in the race here in Imola, and as we've seen in previous races, Ferrari have really good race pace. Particularly in Saudi Arabia, they had as good a race pace as anyone else on track, as good as McLaren and Max Verstappen. And it was basically the same thing here in Imola. Like, Max Verstappen led the whole race. We didn't get to see either McLaren leading this race in true free air. But actually, like, they were with enough gaps that they were mostly in free air. Ferrari had better race pace than the McLarens and Max Verstappen for lots of this race, particularly in the second half of it. They are very quick on a Sunday. They just can't qualify. It comes down to tyres again. It seems that Ferrari, like McLaren, are actually pretty good now at keeping their tyres in a good window through a stint, and therefore they can have very quick race stints. But they just can't get them into a good window in qualifying. I guess maybe the Ferrari heats up its tyres too slowly. I want to say Ferrari had the opposite issues a few years ago. They used to really overheat their tyres, so they were good in quali, but they fell off in the race because they just couldn't manage a race stint. It seems like in correcting that, Ferrari's gone too far the other way, and now their tyres are just too cold. They just can't get any grip in qualifying, and so they keep having bad qualifying. You know, when your two drivers are next to each other, 11 and 12, and also are Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton, they're pretty good drivers. That's not them. That's the car. If Charles Leclerc can't get into Q3, your car is broken. Your car is bad. And so, yeah, Ferrari has just got something going on, which is crazy, because if they could just qualify like P3 to P5, kind of where they should be, they would be getting regular podiums and maybe even winning some races this year, but they just can't qualify. That's going to continue for Ferrari. They have major updates coming. They brought some small updates to Imola, as did many teams. They've got more coming, I would imagine, at the Spanish Grand Prix. Many teams bring upgrades to the Spanish Grand Prix because, you know, you can get good correlation there because the teams know the track well. Also, next race is Monaco before the Spanish Grand Prix. Absolutely no point bringing upgrades to Monaco. You have no idea whether they're working or not, and you'll probably just smash them into a wall. So I imagine Ferrari are bringing their major upgrade in Spain. We shall see if that helps them, if that allows them to actually qualify more, or more faster, more quicker. Because that is really Ferrari's main issue this year. Other than that, they are a true front-running team on a Sunday, just not on a Saturday. But both Ferraris going out in Q2 left obviously two gaps in Q3. Who filled that gap? None other than both Aston Martin cars, Lance Stroll and Fernando Alonso, both up into Q2. Very promising for them. They did actually bring quite a major upgrade to Imola, and it seems to have worked. Aston Martin clearly languishing, having a bad time the last 2 years, basically. But maybe taking some steps in the right direction. It didn't really translate into race pace. They were kind of okay in the race and got a little bit unlucky with the safety cars, but ultimately didn't have the best race pace. But they're getting better, so it's always promising. Fernando Alonso, on his quest to score his first points in 2025, qualified P5 here, which you would think is a good start. Did he manage to get any points out of that? No, but it's promising. So it looks like Aston Martin are on the way up. I obviously predicted at the start of the season they would be fighting for P5, P6. Williams very much has P5 on lock now. We can say that with no doubt, that they've shown this on a variety of circuits, variety of characteristics. They are the fifth best team. Not quite fighting up there for P4 with like Ferrari, but certainly better than everyone else behind them. But I would have thought Aston Martin would be fighting with Alpine, RB, Haas over P6. They're not quite there yet, but it looks like they're getting back there, which is good. It's good to see for the sport. So, with Fernando Alonso P5, Oscar Piastri on pole ahead of Max Verstappen and George Russell, we get to the race. I will say, actually, one final thing from qualifying. Kimi Antonelli, in his first home race of his Formula 1 career, he's actually from very near to Imola. He's from Bologna or Modena, somewhere close, somewhere very close. Not having a good weekend. He qualified P13 behind both the Ferraris. And actually, things did not pick up in the race either. Like, I don't know if Kimi Antonelli just had extra pressure trying to impress at home. He allegedly brought his entire school class to come watch the race. You know, maybe he just got a bit embarrassed in front of his school friends and the nerves got to him, but he just didn't have a good weekend, basically. In either the qualifying, he got up into the points paying positions, but then couldn't really make anything of it. Like, George Russell said he struggled as well, so I guess Mercedes just like didn't have a good time in Imola. But yeah, Kimi Antonelli just not a great race. He finished the race. Wait, actually, no, he didn't finish the race. We'll get onto that in a second. But yeah, that's another noticeable thing from qualifying. So we get into the actual Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. One of the main things that you will see highlights of for this weekend, the not turn one, because turn one is the non-corner, the kink in the straight, but the turn 2 Tamburello pass on the first lap from Max Verstappen on Oscar Piastri to take the lead of this race. So we start Oscar Piastri then Verstappen, Russell, then Lando Norris. Off the line, Piastri doesn't actually get a very good launch. Russell behind him gets a very good launch, and so Oscar stays left to try and block him, with Max Verstappen coming out the outside. And so 3 cars going very close together into the first corner. It looked for a second like George Russell was actually going to take the lead of this race somehow. But round the outside, from nowhere, Max Verstappen just flung it around. Absolute worldy pass around turn 2 to take the lead of this race. And it's one of those ones where if you're watching that, if you were Oscar Piastri watching this, there's nothing he could do. You have to just watch this and be like, yeah, fair play, mate. That's a good overtake. Like, literally nothing could be done. Max Verstappen just went in with way more grip than his car realistically should have had on the opening lap with full fuel, and obviously just caught Oscar out with how much grip and how much speed he could carry into that corner. There was no defending that. But Max Verstappen doing Max Verstappen things, proving why he is the dude Max Verstappen. That is the pass of a world championship driver. And so yeah, like, just once again reminding everyone who the hell he is. Max Verstappen is currently in 3rd in the Drivers' Championship, but he's keeping this thing alive, and it's moves like that, it's performances like here in Imola. Verstappen was just flawless basically this entire weekend, almost had pole position here. I said it a couple of weeks ago, if Verstappen does go on to actually win the championship this year, this will be his best one. This will be his most impressive one, and this is his interview for greatest of all time, basically, because the things he's doing now when he doesn't have the fastest car. I will say Red Bull was his car was pretty competitive compared to McLaren, more so than previous weekends, but still, the things he is now doing in a car that is 3rd in the Constructors' Championship, there is no doubt that this is based on like pure driver skill. And it's great to watch. I love seeing it. We love seeing it. Like, it ended up with a race with absolutely no fight at the front because Max Verstappen just drove off into the distance. Imola is a very dirty, air-oriented track. And so if you're in P1, you have a huge advantage. And so he just drove off down the road. McLaren ended up kind of like fighting amongst each other. And like Norris had to get through the pack a bit. And so they got slowed down a lot. And then Piastri went on a bad strategy. And so no one challenged Verstappen this weekend. There was no fight at the front, which is not great for the race. We did have some interesting stuff. Seeing the McLarens come back through the pack, Oscar Piastri with an earlier pit stop than most, trying to get back through the top 10, seeing the Ferraris come up, that kind of thing. So we had some interesting racing because of those things. And Williams as well, I will say. Alexander Albon just driving that Williams as if it's like a Mercedes. So we had a kind of interesting race for those kinds of things. Not a banger, not a worldie. But we did have a couple of safety cars. First of those was Esteban Ocon. His engine said no. Coming out of Tosa on lap 27, just completely gave up. And so we had a virtual safety car for that one because he was parked relatively close to a marshal post. That was after Piastri had gone on to basically a two-stop strategy, and I think one lap after Norris had pitted for his one-stop strategy. And so it gave Max Verstappen an incredibly cheap pit stop and just cemented his P1 in this race. And so at that point, it was just guaranteed he was going to win, basically. Most people pitted then. A couple of people got screwed over. Most cars stayed on the same strategy at that point. So it didn't shake up things too much. I will say the Aston Martins got kind of screwed with the pit stops, I think. And after a good qualifying position, they got quite hurt by that. We then had another safety car, a full safety car later in the race, when at the same corner, Kimi Antonelli's car also just gave up. Lap 44, coming through Tosa, just no drive, no nothing. Car says no. He pulled over slightly further away from the marshal post, and so they had to get a full safety car so they could get a crane out to come lift his car back to safety. And once again, pit stop worked out pretty good for Max Verstappen. So he was just well in the lead once again. No one was going to undercut him or get a good safety car on him. So yeah, some intrigue in the race because of these things, but ultimately, other than people out of position, just climbing back through the pack, there wasn't much fighting for position. We had a good fight between Albon and Leclerc for the last into the race, so that was fun to watch. But yeah, not a 10 out of 10 race, let's put it that way. And that's something I kind of wanted to talk about here, is it seems that the only way we can guarantee a good race in Formula 1, and this is not just this year, so the last few years, is if we have a chaotic qualifying. That's not the most disheartening thing ever, because we quite regularly have chaotic qualifying. Like, Formula 1's in a place where these cars are so fast and so knife edge, and the competition is so close that drivers have to push so close up to the limits that crashes are pretty regular in qualifying. And so we very often have a red flag or top drivers crashing out of qualifying and then starting well outside of their normal starting positions. We often have chaotic qualifying, but if we don't, we're almost guaranteed a boring race night in Formula 1, which is a shame. Like, we should be able to have a good race wherever. Obviously, it's tough with such fast cars, dirty air problems, etc., etc. I'm not going to go into that too much, but it makes me think, like, should Formula 1 be looking at changes to qualifying? Because while we do get chaotic qualifying quite a lot of the time, we can very easily have just very clean qualifying and everyone qualifies roughly where they're meant to be, and we get cars just lining up 2 by 2, teammates all next to each other, because it's such a highly engineered, highly perfected sport. Without a big crash in qualifying and a red flag, it's pretty rudimentary, and then we just end up with a boring race. And it makes me think, like, should Formula 1 be changing its qualifying format? Should we maybe have shorter qualifying rather than Q1, 2, 3? Maybe have less overall track time for qualifying, so a bad banker lap hurts you more. You have, like, less chance to get it right, so you have to... It's more like one-shot qualifying. You have to be more perfect. Or should we throw some other stuff in there, have, like, individual qualifying so drivers go out one at a time, and then, you know, it ramps up the pressure? I don't know, but I feel like Formula 1 might need to look at something to change up qualifying, because if interesting qualifying is the only way to have an interesting race, surely we want to make sure that we have interesting qualifying. Just food for thought. I'd like to know your thoughts on this. Like, how would you change qualifying if you wanted to make sure there's basically always someone out of position? And I will say that obviously does kind of go against the idea of qualifying. The whole point is to put cars in order. Partially that's for safety. You don't want the slowest car on the grid lining up on P1 because everyone's just going to slam into the back of them. So it's partially safety, and it's partially just like the ethos of racing. Like, what's the point of having qualifying if a good job in qualifying isn't rewarded? Like, the fastest driver and the fastest car should be rewarded with a good qualifying position. But when everything is so highly perfected, that's just the same person every weekend. So do you think Formula 1 should be trying to mix up qualifying a bit more? How would you do that? Is it important? Should we be trying to make changes to the races instead? I think Formula 1 could look at changing qualifying personally, and it'd still be exciting, but at the same time, introducing a bit more chaos. Or making it more about driver skill and less about teams just, like, sciencing all the fun out of it. That kind of thing. I guess the other thing I wanted to talk about is just Williams, basically. Alexander Albon finishes this race P5. He has quite a long fight with Leclerc, and eventually finishes ahead of him, which is really impressive to just, like, beat a Ferrari on merit. Lewis Hamilton came through to beat them both. But, you know, there's an alternative universe where Alex Albon finishes this race P4, and actually, after the last safety car, there's an alternate universe where he finishes this P3. Like, for a time, it looked like he could challenge Oscar Piastri for the back of the podium. That's wild. That's wild. in a Williams. Obviously, great for them. I think this race really, for me, showed that it wasn't just a fluke. So for the last few years, Williams has had a very low drag car, very similar to Racing Bulls this year. And so they could maybe do some decent things in qualifying. And on some tracks, they could have a good result. But now we've raced at Imola, and Williams went well again, because Imola is a very different track to what we've had before. We've had lots of high-speed tracks with like longer aero-dependent corners. All of like Australia, Shanghai, Bahrain, Suzuka, Jeddah, all of those are very high speed with lots of like longer high and medium speed corners. Imola is not that. Imola has lots of heavy braking zones, short corners, and it's an overall slightly slower track. It doesn't have like long aero-dependent corners. Maybe Tamburello, not really, other than that. Maybe Acqua Minerale. But yeah, it's much more of a mechanical grip circuit. And so for Williams to still do well shows that they've got an overall good car. There were no flukes. And that was great. Williams back up there. They are the 5th best team, like no doubt about it. No, now it was not luck. And so good, great, cool for them. Would love to see a Williams podium this year. It looked like it could have happened, you know, if the safety car went on a few more laps and then Albon just had a good restart, he could have been ahead of Piastri to finish that thing. I now think it's going to happen. I think we're going to get a Williams podium this year, which is wild to say from where they were just a few years ago, but I'm all here for it. It's great. I don't think they're going to be challenging for 4th in the Constructors, but they're cementing P5, and that's, you know, if you're Williams, that's good enough for this year anyway. Talking about Constructors Championships, let's go on to Championship Watch. Well, actually, nothing has changed. Absolutely nothing. So in the drivers and constructors, the top 5s are the same as they were following Miami, but in the driver championship, things are closer because our top 3 are Piastri, Norris, and Verstappen in that order, but they obviously finished in the reverse of that, Verstappen, Norris, Piastri, and so they've all bunched up at the top of the driver championship, which is excellent news. It means it's just tighter going into the next few races. Hell yeah. So we still have Oscar Piastri leading the driver championship, 146 points. Norris is still P2 on 133, which means the gap is now down to just 13 points. It was 16 following Miami. If Norris had won here in Imola, it would have been even closer, just a 6-point gap. But 13 is still pretty close. So, you know, a Norris win and a Piastri P4 in Monaco would see that change hands. It keeps it alive. Great. Max Verstappen is still in 3rd in the driver championship, 124, and so only 9 points behind Norris and 22 behind Oscar. But I would say, as long as you're less than 25 points behind, if you're within 25 points of the leader, I would classify that as a proper championship battle. We obviously had, 2022, Max Verstappen came from 48 points behind to beat Leclerc and then absolutely demolish him. Like, that wasn't close at the end of the year, don't get me wrong. But you can overcome a deficit of more than 22. But I would say within 25 is a close championship battle, because if your opponent has a DNF, things can still swap hands. If it's more than 25, like it was basically for all of last year with Norris and Verstappen, it's a championship battle, sort of, but it's not a close one. But we still have 3 drivers within 25 points at the top of this thing. Love to see it. Love to see it. Which means, yeah, if Verstappen has another win and the McLarens crash into each other, like Spain 2016 style, Verstappen will be leading the championship. Like, it could change hands to any of them any weekend. Oh, yes. Love to see it. George Russell still on P4. He's kind of dropped back now. He's on 99 points, so 47 behind Piastri. He's not in contention. It would take something drastic over several weekends for Russell to get properly back in contention. But still good for him. And Charles Leclerc is still P5, but again, he's on 61, so less than half the points of Piastri now. Less than half the points of Verstappen even, so they're not in the fight, but they're keeping it interesting. Also, Lewis Hamilton is now up into 6th in the drivers, so just kind of where he should be, actually. In the Constructors' Championship, again, the orders haven't changed, but actually it has become less close. So McLaren is now on 279 in first place, Mercedes second place on 147, So 132 behind McLaren. McLaren almost double the points Mercedes. Just give it now. Just give them the trophy now. They've won the Constructors' Championship. That is not going to change. That is a crazy, crazy points deficit. Like, there's obviously more points in the Constructors because it's 2 cars, but still, like, McLaren's so far in the lead and they look so strong, and that's not changing. I will say, the Constructors' battle for 2nd, 3rd, 4th is interesting and is going to stay that way for a while. So Mercedes is on 147. Red Bull is in 3rd on 131, only 16 points behind. And then Ferrari is in 4th on 114, so only 33 points behind Mercedes. That battle, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, that is going to be very interesting this year. And that's still very important. Like, the difference between 2nd and 4th is still a huge difference in paycheck. And also just a huge difference in bragging rights, because, you know, if you're the 3rd best team, that's still a top team. But being the 2nd best means you are the challenger for the title. That's way more important in terms of, like, pride and team motivation than being 3rd or 4th. And so it is going to be a tough fight for 2nd place in the Constructors. And we love to see it. Ferrari now coming along with their race pace could easily get up there if they just learn to qualify. It's going to be interesting with Red Bull because obviously Max is doing absolute bits, but will the pressure start to mount on Tsunoda? He came back from his pit lane start to score 1 point in this race, but that's not really enough when Max is winning it, consistently getting double-digit points. Going to be interesting if we get like a tough fight for 2nd place in Constructors at the end of the year, and if the pressure starts to mount on Tsunoda again for not scoring enough points. It's going to be interesting. I do expect that storyline to start up again in a few months' time. But for now, Red Bull in 3rd place, Ferrari in 4th place, and Williams were in 5th place last weekend, and they now really cement their 5th place with, what, a 5th for Albon and an 8th for Sainz, totaling 14 points? Yeah. So they are going to get 5th. 6th place is Haas, and they have like 20, so not even close. Obviously, a big shame for Aston Martin this weekend. After such a strong qualifying, they still finish with no points in the bag. Alonso still has 0 points in the driver's standings. He continues his epic search for those. I do believe they're going to start scoring some and get themselves further off the bottom of the Constructors, but they're going to have to wait. But if they're qualifying well, we've got Monaco up next. If you qualify P5 in Monaco, you are most likely going to finish P5 in Monaco. So it's not all doom and gloom for Fernando Alonso. We shall be back next weekend. I'm going to buy more cables and stuff, and so I should be out on the camping chair in the world somewhere recording this thing. Join me then for the 2nd part of this triple header. It's going to be glorious. Until that time, I've been Mr. V. Enjoy your week, and I'll Mr. C you later.